since our recording has started, if I could ask all of our faculty members to introduce themselves again officially on camera.
I'll start. So I'm Michelle Fellows. I'm new to UAA and KPC. I am technically located at the KPC campus, which doesn't matter as much right now since we're all virtual. I have a PhD from the University of Texas. I got it in 2009 and have been in Idaho before coming here to Alaska. So I'm really glad to get to know some of the students in our program.
I'm Dr. Hattie Harvey, and I'll follow Dr. Fellows' lead. Thank you. I have my doctorate degrees in child, family, and school psychology, and I teach across our programs in undergraduate, master's, and the doctoral program. And I am a licensed school psychologist as well, and prior to coming to the university, I worked in the Anchorage School District as a school psychologist, and most of my work now is really focused in early childhood. That was a special area training in my program, was on birth to 5 school psychology. Glad to be here.
I'm Sarah Buckingham, faculty primarily associated with the PhD program, so I don't get to meet with undergraduate students too much, and it's really nice to see you all here today. But occasionally I do get to teach some undergrad courses like social psych and community psych, but I work across our programs as well, work with the master's program too. I am a licensed psychologist. My work is largely with people who have been forced to migrate. So I work a lot with refugees and asylum seekers, and love all the work that I do. So thanks for having me here today.
I guess I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name's Eric Murphy. I'm a faculty member in the psych department. Obviously, I'm also the director of the psychology department. My PhD is in experimental psychology. And I focus most of my research looking at animal learning and behavior processes in rats, and I've also published with pigeons and mice and dwarf hamsters as well. And I primarily use operant conditioning techniques. And for those of you that haven't taken the learning and behavior class, you'll know all about operant conditioning by the time you're done with that. And I also teach behavioral neuroscience as well, which is Psych 370.
And then, forgive me, I should have clarified this with Chloe beforehand. Chloe, would you like me to be here as a faculty member or just to support as an advisor for the club?
I would love if you could be a faculty member as well. I would like your information.
Oh, you're too kind. I'm Veronica Howard. I'm one of the faculty members in the department. I'm also a behavior analyst like Dr. Murphy. My specialty area is in a field called organizational behavior management. So it's the industrial psychology of behavior analysis. My work focuses on ways to increase access and increase really stretch resources, such as improving volunteer performance in nonprofits. And I do a fair bit of work in open education, trying to make education more accessible and affordable to students who need it.
All right, so now the introductions are out of the way. If anybody has any questions, feel free to turn your mic on, say something, or if you want, you can just type it in the chat. Just make sure it is going publicly so I can read it out.
Okay, well, I guess I'll ask a question then. I'm fairly new to the UAA psych program, as started in 2019, and advising wise, I've gotten some recommendations, but as of now, I only have 3 psych classes under my belt. So I've got the Psych 101. And then I guess technically 2, and then introduction to behavior management. Almost made Dr. Howard mad there for a second. And then I'm in strategies of behavior change right now and stats for psychology. What should I start thinking about for my next steps classes? What should I really like? I know that that's a tough question because there's lots of options, but what would be a good progression for that?
I don't know. 1, 2, 3, not it, since I'm brand new.
I was gonna say, is anybody gonna? Well, I would like to task. I know we have a couple of specialty areas in our department, so I'm going to call on Dr. Harvey to tell us a little bit about our children's mental health program, and I'd like to, at the end, if I can't, take a moment to talk about behavior analysis, and then we can fit all the stuff in the middle that folks want to share.
That makes sense. Some of that will address some of your questions as well, Jeffrey, in the interim. In a minor, some of you may have heard about the children's mental health minor, and then there's also a graduate certificate in children's mental health, and there's a lot of similarities across one focus. I'm presuming this is all undergraduate students, right? Is that correct? Yeah, okay, because it's the psychology club. The mental health minor is really designed to have kind of a breadth of knowledge and experience across disciplines that might serve and work with children and families across from OCS to supporting in the schools, to in infant learning programs and early intervention or preschool. It really is a breadth, kind of a, is that the right word? It's not targeted to prepare you to have one specific job in a specific discipline, because there's a lot of flexibility in the courses that you take. There are 3 required areas, and even within those 3 required areas, there are options of courses to take. And it's 18 credits total, minor. And I think the best place is probably looking at the catalog, which was just revised. So actually, that's actually not the best place. Questions about that, you can shoot them to me or Dr. Ippolito, who many of you may have had.
And for folks joining us a little bit late, we're answering the question, what should a student be focusing on next in their program of study if they've taken a couple courses, but they're not sure where to go next?
So I'm not as familiar with the progression as the other faculty yet, since I'm new. But my experience in general is that our degree is pretty broad, right? When you are training to become a psychologist, there's so many different avenues that you can go down. And so I would say that one of the things that could guide your choices about what courses to take beyond the requirements, which I would encourage you to tackle sooner than later. So if you're in stats now, research methods would be a good next one. But to think about your interests, because one of the things that many students are working towards is getting into graduate school, because we have a discipline where if you want to practice either as a helper or a helping profession or doing research, there's a very good chance you're going to need additional education, and being able to have some clarity on which pathway you will go when you get to those programs is helpful. And there's 2 good ways, I think, to get clarity. One is to try things out. So, taking classes that are of interest to see if yes, they are or no, they aren't. And then the second is to start getting engaged in ways that are actually outside of class to help you find what feeds you and what doesn't feed you. So those might be things like being a part of a psych club or psych-hi, and then also volunteer experiences. There's nothing nothing that will ever replace hands-on experience. When I was an undergraduate, I did a volunteer experience with CASA, which is an organization that supports children who've been taken out of their homes and are in the foster system. And that for me clarified that I do not want to do that kind of work. You know, I learned a lot about myself and helped me figure out which direction not to go. And that was really valuable. And I would have never known that if I hadn't put my boots on the ground, so to speak. And I know everybody's very busy, right? It's not just us. So Chloe, I appreciate you acknowledging our time and our busyness, but we know that you guys are also extraordinarily busy people as well. But looking for opportunities to help you get that clarity, I think, you know, Jeffrey, it sounds like you particular, I know, are engaged in a variety of ways. And so thinking about how you might, you know, try new things, that would be my major advice.
If it's
Jeffrey,
okay, oh, please, Dr. Murphy.
hey, Jeffrey, did you say you completed research methods and statistics?
No, I'm working on statistics right now, and I'm trying to get research methods as soon as possible. So
I see. So I would take research methods next semester, and then you'd have to look. But you know, our the core classes in the psych program are actually pretty prescriptive in terms of the courses you need to take. Actually, we're more prescriptive than other undergraduate psychology programs. What I would do is look at the core classes that you need to take that are upper division that you don't need Psych 260 or 261 for. So one that comes to mind would be Psych 345, our abnormal psychology class. You can take that course without any, all you need is Psych 111 for that. And just look for some other courses as well. I do suggest you get research methods out of the way as soon as possible, because that is what we consider a gateway course. And we believe it's really fundamental if you're going to be a psych major that you understand research methods. So get that out of the way. And that's a prerequisite for Psych 468, which is our learning and behavior course. And not only just get through the class, do well in the class, because that's a fundamental class.
absolutely.
Our curriculum.
Well, and I'd like to, if I can, come back to what Dr. Fellows said, which was, you know, get involved, find out what is most of interest to you, and do that maybe through volunteering, maybe through finding a job, because there'd be nothing more heartbreaking than investing a whole lot of time and a whole lot of effort and a whole lot of money into a degree that once you actually try it, once you're actually doing it in the field, you discover this is not for you. But yeah, Dr. Murphy, I know that nobody ever thought that they would hear me say this, but getting stats, finishing stats, learning stats, the lingua franca of psychology is really important. The last thing I would say is speak to your professors. If there's content in a particular course that really you connect with, that you really gravitate toward, they might be able to provide you some guidance. They might be able to say, you know, it sounds like you are interested in this. Try these courses so that you know what you might like to take before you graduate. Also, behavior analysis.
Well, thank you everybody for that. That actually helps narrow down a lot of stuff and makes me think a little bit. So thank you very much.
I can do a question. So for each of our faculty, what kind of research are you interested in? Are you currently pursuing research with undergrad students, with graduate students? What are you doing in the research field?
I raised my hand because you think that I'm going to talk first, but really what I want to hear about is Dr. Buckingham's research first. So I'm so sorry. Dr. Buckingham, I'm going to push you under the bus.
Being voluntold. Sure, I'm happy to share about my research. So my work broadly, I look at how culture impacts our mental health, and I do a lot of work with folks who have had their cultures forcibly oppressed. And so that's largely with forced migrants, but also with Alaska Native peoples. And I have lots of interesting research going on in lots of different areas. One of the beautiful things about being a clinical community psychologist is community psychologists are always interested in what communities care about. And so we get to have a more flexible program of research because we develop it in conjunction with people who are actually impacted by it. And so a lot of the research questions I ask and intend to answer are questions being asked by the people I work with. So I have a lot of research projects going on. They're all really fun. Because all of them involve community partners in some ways. So I do a lot of work with our resettlement agency, do a lot of work with Native Student Services, do a lot of work with the municipality of Anchorage, with Welcoming Anchorage. And so all of that research is done in partnership, which I think makes it really special and engaging. I do what's called mixed methods research. So I use both quantitative research, which is a lot of what you learn in your statistics courses and how to do that data collection and analysis. And then my specialty is really in qualitative research. And so qualitative research is when we talk to people, either individually or in groups, or maybe observe people. And then we do coding of that, and we look for themes and things that come up in the richness of that data, which is really fun. My research team is pretty broad. So I have largely PhD students on my research team, but I have some master students involved too. I have a postdoc who's involved. A couple of postdocs actually, and then have an undergraduate from a different institution who's part of my research team, but no undergraduates from UAA right now. So certainly if any of you are interested in getting involved, I'd be happy to talk to you about what that looks like and opportunities. But yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer because we have a really diverse research team with doing lots of different sorts of things. One of my graduate students recently put together a little web page for us, so I'll dump it in the chat window in case you want to see the different projects we have going on in our partners.
And some of the best research I've seen in the last couple of years is the work that Dr. Ozuru is doing. Dr. O, do you mind telling us about, because I personally love the research. Even if I don't understand all of it, I love it. So do you care to share some of your research?
Sure. I think Jonathan is here as well. So I'm interested in, generally, me as a cognitive psychologist, I'm interested in how people think. And in particular, the things that I'm interested in is the type of thinking called diagnostic reasoning. Or, for example, when you go to doctor tells you that you have a COVID-19. The reason why he thinks that you have a COVID-19 is because of the series of symptoms. That's a pretty complicated thinking, and that's probably specific too, and it's actually related to those folks who's interested in operant conditioning, because it requires that what is the things that's going to predict the future things. So, and there are many different kinds of hypotheses of how that's accomplished. Can people say this person is dumb because of this? That's intuitive. But on the other hand, some types of diagnostic thinking requires very elaborate logical reasoning. So, and I'm interested in how college students do not have adequate ability to do that kind of reasoning. But on the other hand, under some circumstances, people are pretty good in terms of doing diagnostic, like this person is jerk because he did certain kind of things. So there are many different ways in which people's thinking work in that context. That's one thing that I'm interested in. Even though the other one that this is not my expertise, the other things that I'm interested in is politics. Like in particular, right now, I'm interested in what really differentiate really conservative people versus really liberal people. One working hypothesis that I'm interested in is maybe these two different kinds of people see the situation in a different way, especially in terms of whether something is more characterized as cooperation versus more characterized as competition. So this is very exploratory topic at this stage, but I'm curious, for example, when I ask all these people here, like imagine that you are in the middle of the traffic in the downtown. Do you think successful maneuver in that traffic situation is more to do with the competition or to do with the cooperation with other drivers? I think different people respond in a different way. That may be telling of how people see the world. And that may be somewhat related to whether you're more toward liberal or toward conservative. And those are the kind of things that I'm interested in.
And I think related to that, your example was just perfect because I found myself yesterday waiting in line for something, and a professional was like, okay, we're going to do it this way. You're going to go over there and you're going to go over here and you're going to whatever. And then these folks just clearly disregarded the instructions that they were given and just created chaos and nonsense. And I'm just sitting there seething, like I can feel my face getting really hot, which is part of my research, trying to increase capacity and do more work and do more good. And sometimes it just comes down to, why are people not doing what they're supposed to do? You have a program, but folks aren't implementing it. You're trying to make something work, and the organism is just not responding in the way that you need them to. So my research, I have a few lines of research, a lot of eclectic fields of study. The one that is nearest and dearest to my heart is just getting people to do their darn jobs. So that and some open educational research work, what happens when we use materials that have a license that makes them free to access? What do people think about it? How can we get students interested in it and involved in it? But we haven't talked about Dr. Murphy's amazing research.
Was that my prompt? So as I mentioned earlier, I study animal learning and behavior using operant conditioning techniques in the laboratory. I've actually never published a study on humans, believe it or not, although I think a lot of my research has implications for human behavior. The area where I've done most of my research is looking at how reinforcers, so those are stimuli that increase the frequency of the behavior that they follow, how they change in value with their repeated presentation, and trying to figure out the environmental conditions under which reinforcers can increase in their value or decrease in their value. And I think there's a lot of applied implications for understanding how these reinforcers can change in their value, especially if you're working with kids with autism, for example, doing intensive behavioral intervention. If you need to enhance the value of a reinforcer because it's just not working anymore, at least based on my rat and pigeon and dwarf hamster research, there's a lot of techniques you can use to ramp up the value of that reinforcer. Or if you've got a problematic reinforcer, one that's maintaining a target behavior that you don't want to have happen at a high frequency, you can use techniques to decrease the value of that reinforcer as well. So that's where most of my work has been done. I've also studied choice behavior in both pigeons and rats in the tradition of the matching law. If you haven't had Psych 468 yet, you probably haven't learned anything about the matching law, but it's a behavioral principle about how animals allocate their behavior across multiple alternatives. Most recently, Dr. Gwen and I have collaborated on a study looking at impulsive decision-making in rats, which was pretty interesting. So we can classify rats based on their ability to delay discount. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that, but the more delayed a reward is between the time the behavior is emitted to when the reinforcer is delivered, animals tend to discount it the further it is in the future on the temporal horizon. And so you can determine which animals are more self-controlled versus impulsive based on the rate at which they discount. And so we've done some interesting work in delay discounting. And then before I came to UAA, I used to do a lot of behavioral neuroscience research. So looking at different brain mechanisms and how it relates to animal learning and behavior as well. So that's my research program in a nutshell. Unfortunately, I don't have as much time as I used to be in the lab because I am head of the department, and that's where most of my time is spent right now. Luckily, I've got a great colleague, Dr. Gwen, and she's keeping the rat lab running. And she's an absolutely phenomenal colleague, but she's also a great mentor as well. So if you have interest in experimental psychology or going into areas of behavioral neuroscience or the experimental analysis of behavior, I do recommend getting in contact with Dr. Gwen. And I can ghost mentor behind the scenes, but in terms of being on the front lines, wrangling rats, I don't have the time to do that anymore, unfortunately. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, or you could ask them in this forum too. And I just noticed Dr. Eldridge just joined us.
Yes, it was just one of my favorite activities, which is the oral competency exam for MS students. And yeah, it was a wonderful day. They did a great job. And yes, indeed, Dr. Howard asked, is this Weasel? And yes, this is Weasel. So I'm sure she'll go over there and stick her nose in the camera shortly. So anyhow, thanks for the invitation. I'm here.
Well, and Chloe, speaking of questions.
This is my life. Okay. Need to unmute myself first. So I know another question that I had was, how did you decide to go into the academic field kind of subsection of psychology, where you said, yes, I want to teach? Because obviously, you know, if you're a clinical psychologist, you can do private practice, you could work not in academia, or if you're cognitive, you can work in a company or experimental, specifically research, not academic research. So my question is, how do you decide? Why did you decide?
Well, and Dr. Eldridge, you're joining us, so we haven't heard many answers from you. Do you care to tell us more about your experience and why you chose psych?
How I chose psychology in general? I was actually in an architecture program at University of Manitoba, and I took a psychology course or two for an elective, and next thing I knew, I was in the psychology graduate program. So accidents, I think. Yeah. Was that an answer about why I ended up in psychology? And I guess the next question was, why end up in sort of academic psychology rather than something else? I think in my case, that was also an accident. It just, you end up in places where doors just open. And when I went on my predoctoral internship, was involved in a very research intensive academic internship, and ended up making connections with people there, and then went back to where I had been living before when I finished internship with my dissertation, and ended up working at the School of Medicine at the University of Manitoba. And so I think that, I don't think I ever sat down and said, this is what I want to do. I think that doors just opened up, and I went through them and ended up doing things that I really like doing. So I never, maybe a better question is, once I got on that path, why did I never leave it? And I think it was because it was a path where I could, at various points in my career, do all of those things. I could teach, I could do research, I could do clinical work, I could do supervision. Yeah, so it was just a kind of nice combination of things that fit together, and never gave me any impetus to go over the traces and do something else. So please, somebody else weigh in on that one, because other people probably have different routes into what they're doing than I did.
Yeah, I have maybe the opposite route, where I purposely made a lot of choices to get to where I am. So I intended, so I'm not trained clinically, I'm trained as a research psychologist, and I intended when I started my PhD program to be the kind of professor that is managing a research program and a teaching program. And so you didn't hear me contribute to the last question because I don't have a research program. Being with KPC, I'm what's called a bipartite faculty, meaning that my job is largely teaching plus service, where everyone else here is a tripartite, where they have teaching plus research plus service. And so for me, I realized about halfway through my program, my graduate program, that teaching is where what fed me. I mentioned that earlier. I really think that we should be attentive to what feeds us. And I realized that in terms of the kind of life that I wanted to live, outside of my work, that research wasn't the right fit for me. And so I purposely chose to go the route of teaching. And I started at a community college. And from where I came from, that was actually kind of frowned upon. So I was in a pretty prestigious PhD program where you go to be a research psychologist. And when I said, no, I'm going to be a teacher and that's what I want to do, people were like, And so I had to make some choices that were kind of not where people were grooming me to become. But I'm very happy with those choices, and they have fit my interests, and I feel like I contribute a lot in the work that I do. So I'm very satisfied with that pathway.
I think my my answer will be closer to Dr. Eldridge's. I didn't know that I was going to ever get my PhD, to be honest. It had never crossed my mind as something that was possible for me to do. But I was inspired by some faculty in my undergraduate work. That's ultimately what pushed me on to do my PhD. And I was very purposeful in the programs I looked into for my doctorate. I love clinical work, and I was working as a clinician for a while before I decided to pursue my PhD. But I felt really limited and stuck in the work that I was doing, because a lot of the work that I do comes, and a lot of the work that all clinical psychologists do, comes from social problems and comes from big structural issues that we have in society. And so I really wanted to pursue a program that allowed me to do both, to be licensed as a clinical psychologist, but then to be able to think about things at a much broader level, systemic level. And that's what community psychology is. So I didn't really know if I wanted to be an academic when I was in my graduate program. I was kind of figuring things out. But I am a person that gets kind of bored with too much of one thing. And so I really like being tripartite, because I get to teach, I get to do a lot of service, I get to do a lot of research, and it just keeps things really exciting. And why I'm in the specific field that I'm in, or in the role that I'm in, is I really enjoy deep relationships with students and being able to work one-on-one, provide a lot of mentorship, clinical supervision, help students through their dissertation research, and really watch people progress. And I'm able to have really deep relationships with my students, because I'm typically, working with students for 6 or 7 years in their PhD program. And so I'm able to really develop those relationships in a special way. So that's what kind of keeps me at it. And what keeps me at UAA in particular is because we do have one of the only dual clinical community programs in the nation. And I think that's really special. I trained in one of those programs, and I am so happy to be able to contribute to one. And I also really appreciate UAA's focus on community in the work that we do. So some programs, like what Michelle was speaking to, really train people to just kind of churn out grants and really focus on getting as many publications as they can. And certainly that's important. That's a way that we need to disseminate our research for other researchers. But what gets lost in that, if you're in institutions like that sometimes, is your translation of that research back to people who do stuff with it. Right. And so I feel like here I'm able to really train people and do work to make sure that that research gets to policymakers, that it gets to community organizations, that it gets to the people who actually do stuff with it, and isn't just, behind a paywall on some journal that maybe 5 people will read. Yes, you're here, Veronica.
Well, I mean, you're speaking my language when you're talking about giving the research back to folks who will benefit the most from it. I don't think I've made any, I don't think I've hidden my desire to share information back to folks. But in terms of the path of how folks got to where they are, I never would have dreamed that I would be a psychology professor. When I started college, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to be a criminal profiler. And I was a criminal justice major and a psych major with an emphasis in behavior analysis. But that happened because when I went in to talk to the chair of my department as an undergraduate, I told them what my interests were. And he said, that's not really what you want to do. And I was like, no, I'm pretty clear that the actual criminal profiling, not the stuff from like Criminal Minds, but like actual criminal profiling, behavioral analysis unit, that is the stuff that I want to do. And he was like, there's no room for you there. And so I was like, well, we'll just see about that. So I found the next best thing. I took a course in behavior analysis, believing that it was in fact criminal profiling, and discovered, no, that's not the case. I was very lucky that I made it through my first course in behavior analysis, which was taught by whom I can only describe affectionately as an old Nazi, and made it to my undergraduate advisor, Paul Andronis, who was very interested in clinical applications that aligned more closely with social work and solving social issues. It was working with Dr. Andronis that I got introduced to doing things in a pigeon lab and understanding interventions for aggression, because my understanding was I was going to work with very marginalized communities to try to help remediate behavior that made people kind of undesirable. And then I think I'm going to go to grad school. I think I'm going to do one thing. I find that no, in fact, I love teaching. As you probably could imagine, I get in front of a group of people and just really enjoy being there. It's like stand-up / class time. And I don't know that I could picture myself doing any other thing except maybe criminal profiling. Oh, I just got tea on myself.
Do you think we could ask the students who are here what kind of degrees or jobs they think they want to help us know them?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I can start, or Jeff, if you want to start. I saw you turn your mic on.
I mean, you can definitely start too. We'll start with you, and then I'll jump in.
Okay. So right now I am a senior. I just finished data collection for my senior thesis, so I'm working on that. I was originally going to go ahead and straight on apply to some clinical psychology PhD programs. And then I realized that's really hard, especially when COVID is happening and I don't have a break between semesters or anything like that. So I decided, let's push it back a little bit. Let's make sure like this is something I actually want. Luckily, I do have a partner that is in a PhD program and is not clinical, but I can kind of see what's going on over there. So I can kind of get a better understanding of how that's going. So my plan for now is I'll take a year off so I can focus on fixing my GRE score and just getting everything ready to submit applications. So for clinical psych PhD programs. But ultimately, I really want to work in clinical psych, but I want to work with children. I am in the children's mental health minor, and I'm really interested in working with kind of that group of young kids to adolescents.
And so I'm a very new junior based on previous time back at University of North Carolina in the 90s. So it's been a long time since I've been back to school, and I'm kind of torn, and I don't know if I necessarily need to be torn between working towards becoming a clinician, and getting a master's in that, or pursuing something along the lines of OBM, which is more along the line of our behavior management kind of degree program, followed by something else, because that kind of lines up with what I was doing in the Coast Guard, for doing supervision and organizational change. I was doing fishing vessel exams and trying to implement changes there. So I have a lot of latitude and leeway to go, and I'm still kind of in the, I don't really know where I want to be, but I've got to start firming it up because I'm on the GI Bill, and they're real narrow about what you can take. So.
Ashley, you want to go next?
Sorry, forgetting where all the buttons are on this. So I'm kind of like Jeff. I'm really new to the program. This is my first semester back. I have an associate's in early childhood development, and realized that like teaching in large groups is not for me. And that's pretty much what our entire education system is doing right now in America. But so I took some time off, and now I'm back, and I was like, oh, I think I want to explore psychology some more, but I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to take it in. So I was like, oh, I'll just do a few classes this semester. And then I registered for next semester, and it's like all psychology classes. And so I'm really enjoying it, but yeah, not quite sure what direction I want to go in. But I am pretty sure I want to do the childhood minor, just to kind of like go in the flow of what I know that I'm passionate about. I really love working with kids, but try to maybe focus it so I can work in small groups or one-on-one settings a little bit better. And I'm really excited to see where the classes go as I get further into the program. But I know that if I go for grad school in any shape or form, that I need to kind of figure out in the next couple semesters what I want to do exactly.
Thank you. How about, oh yeah, Yana, go ahead. I see you unmuted.
Turned on the camera and everything. Oh, sorry, I'm still at work back there for being. I am a super senior here. I'm in my second semester coming back to UAA. I had originally come and got degrees at UAA, both in linguistics and anthropology, because I really loved people, and I was like wanting to learn about what makes people do the things they do and why are they doing it and how long have they been doing it. And they're really fascinating, and I graduated, but then the career pathways in them just wasn't the kind of peopling I wanted to be doing. I found out through, just life experience. And so I came back to get my degree in psychology, because how much more peoply can you get? And so I'm really looking forward to eventually just being a therapist here in Anchorage and working with people one-on-one, helping them, go through whatever they're going through, figuring out how they people and why they people the way they do, because it's such a complex and amazing thing, and it's so different for all of us. So I'm wrapping up my bachelor's now and hoping to figure out how to get towards the master's program. That application date is coming up soon. So yeah, I'm working towards that and really enjoying the classes along the way.
Yes, March 1st. And Jana, you should never say you just want to be a therapist. That is really hard, really important work. So just get rid of that just in front of it, because you're embarking on something that's really significant and important and hard. So just get rid of the
Thanks.
just.
I'm battling a family philosophy of it's not really a doctor kind of thing. So I'm working through that right now.
Yeah. I'd like to see most physicians do what therapists can do. Can't do it.
Awesome, great. How about Jonathan? Or Asha?
And Asia shared in chat that her plan is to become a BCBA.
Okay. And then Leonard.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Leonard Hall. Actually, I guess I'll turn my video on too. My name is Leonard Hall. I have a degree in an unrelated field. I was talking about going for a MBA for years, and one day my wife said, "Stop talking about that. It's not where you need to go." And she started talking about psychology, and I thought, that's just crazy. Like, I had one psychology class in my bachelor's program, and like, I don't know anything about psychology. So I started looking into it. And the more she talked about it, and the more she gave support to her idea, the more I thought that maybe she was correct. And at the end of this semester, I'll have 23 semester hours in psychology, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. I just need to figure out how to get into a graduate program. I'm almost done with all the prerequisites to get in.
That's amazing. Well, and Dr. Machado has been able to join us. Hi, Dr. Machado. We've been asking and answering questions, but do you mind telling folks who you are, what you teach, what your interests are?
Sure. So I am Dr. Michael Machado. I teach mostly in the undergraduate and then some master's courses, primarily in the behavior analysis concentration minor and soon to be master's program. My main areas of research involve applying a behavior analytic lens to any popular claim in health and psychology. So right now we're examining things like magic bracelets to help you lose weight and ovulate at a regular cycle, as well as looking at different fonts that are used to help kiddos with reading disabilities, as well as dyscalculia, looking at different forms like touch math in comparison to what we did when I was in grade school, the traditional arithmetic calculations. So my lab pretty much is weird, and that's where I enjoy a lot of my research and examples that I bring into classes from 100 level to graduate seminars. And I apologize for my tardiness. It's been a day of curriculum. It's been fun.
So something I just wanted to say, since everybody shared what they're interested in, and I appreciate you doing that, is that the theme that really popped out to me was a lot of you guys came back or are coming back from different experiences, and just reiterating that, you know, experience is one of the best ways to drive what you're doing. And as you have these experiences, be thoughtful and attentive to yourself about what you're liking and what you're not liking, what feeds you and what doesn't feed you, and to check to make sure that that's coming from within you and not necessarily from what people on the outside are telling you should want or what you should like. So keep up the exploration. I know it feels overwhelming sometimes at this point, right? Where you're like, I have to decide the whole rest of my life right now. You don't really, but I know that it feels like that.
So another question that we can bring up is, why are you specifically at UAA? What brought you here? Why are you staying here? And then are there any opportunities at UAA for students that you don't see in other places?
Is that a question for the faculty?
I was just going to ask that same question.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Well, I guess I could go first. I actually am a graduate of UAA, and you know, UAA is what gave me my start. And I didn't really talk much about why I ended up where I'm at and why I chose psychology. It's kind of strange, and I agree with what Gloria and Michelle said earlier. You know, I just kept my mind open, and I took a class called Learning and Cognition, which is a course we no longer offer here, but it had a rat lab associated with it, where you got a rat for a semester and got to learn all the basic behavioral principles that you learn about in the lecture portion of the class. And what I realized was that when I manipulated a variable, my rat's behavior changed accordingly. And I just fell in love with that whole process, being able to see the behavior change in real time. And then the following semester, I took a course in applied behavior analysis. And actually, that's a course that Dr. Howard currently teaches. And part of that course involved a practicum I had to do 90 hours of a practicum, and where I was put on the front lines working with children with developmental disabilities. And I recognized right away that the techniques that I learned about with rats, such as shaping by successive approximations, positive reinforcement, stimulus discrimination, all of those techniques that you learn or principles that you learn in the class actually work with humans as well. And so when I was working with my kid, I was using shaping techniques to get appropriate verbal responses out of him. It was just utterly amazing. So I dropped everything and just decided I was going to pursue behavior analysis. And then the question became, should I go the experimental analysis of behavior route, or should I go the applied behavior analysis route? Because I was involved in both subfields, and it just came down to counting up how many times I got bit, compared, how many times did I get bit by a rat versus getting bit by a child with autism? And I see Michael laughing. And it turned out that the child with autism bit me more often and put me in the hospital more often than my rats did. So I chose to go the experimental analysis of behavior route. And from there, I was very systematic about everything. I think, Sarah, you mentioned that you're very systematic in how you selected the programs you applied for. I did the same exact thing, and I won the lottery. I got to work with B.F. Skinner's very last graduate student. So that was really, it was just really wonderful to hear stories about B.F. Skinner from my mentor. And then I went to graduate school, and just as I was completing my PhD, I already had a postdoc lined up in behavioral neuroscience. And it just turned out that one of the faculty members here at UAA was retiring. He was an experimental psychologist. For whatever reason, they were having some issues with getting a robust job pool. I think they failed the search the previous year, and they asked me to apply, and I got the job, and I was very happy to come back to Alaska, to be honest with you. So I had no regrets there. And UAA is just a gem of an institution. And those of you that have been at these larger research-oriented institutions know what I'm talking about. Sarah, you alluded to it earlier, where it's publish or perish. There's a big push to get, these $1 million grants and all that other stuff. And here, I think that we can do a lot of cool stuff. I mean, we can do teaching. We can focus just on teaching if that's what we want, or we can teach and do some research and then do some important service activities as well. So there's a huge variety of activities that faculty can do and contribute to the overall mission of the university, and that's what I appreciate the most about this institution. So there's no regrets about skipping my postdoc to come back home. So that's my 2 cents. I think I answered the question, right? Okay, great.
Can I just jump in here a little bit, because our trajectory was so similar. I told you I was in the architecture program, needed some psychology electives, ended up in a course with Joseph Pear in applied behavior analysis, and then ended up shaping a rat in the rat lab. And once you see those principles at work, they are so powerful that I too just ended up in psychology, and then subsequently spent my master's years in the pigeon lab, where I was bitten by rats a lot and was probably pooped on by more aerial pigeons than I would care to. They're messy, nasty beasts, actually. So
I found that part of their initiation procedure is to poop on you. Pigeon.
Yeah, well, they initiated me for the entire time I was in the pigeon lab, which I think was 6 years. So I guess they didn't feel I was sufficiently initiated. So, and then when I ended up made a decision to move into the clinical program because there was a brand new track in behavior therapy. And at that point, you had the best of all possible worlds, because suddenly all my learning courses and all my work in the pigeon lab and all the work from the lab next door, which was a Pavlovian lab, suddenly I had seen all these things, and then started working with a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder and a lot of conditioning disorders. And when you had seen those principles of exposure and understood the classical and operant conditioning underlying so much behavior, it was so clear that I was in the right place. So kind of a similar thing to you, Eric, the principles snag you, or seeing the principles at work snags you.
Well, now hold on just a darn second, because we're kind of sending a message here that behavior analysis is all about getting hit and bit. And I'm not very comfortable with that dialogue. I am very proud to report that I have, I don't believe I've ever been bit. No, I did work at the shelter. Okay, the point I'm trying to make is that it is uncomfortable sometimes, but it's so valuable. The work is so valuable. And speaking of value, you can do that here. Part of what keeps me at UAA is the fact that undergraduates are the center, they are the core of the work that I am doing as a faculty member. It's not like another institution where you don't have time to even speak to your professor. You have to go through a GTA, or you can't do the work that you really want to do because you have to stay in this track and finish everything that they tell you to do, and you have no choice. Here at UAA, students have a great deal of agency, and they can try things, they can experiment with things, they can be involved in research, they can be involved in the community, making changes in the community. And I know a lot of our faculty members are looking for partners in that. That's what I love about UAA.
I can kind of jump in with a connective thread across the two. As someone who has worked with animals as well as kids a lot of my life, I'm no stranger to the hitting, kicking, biting. In fact, my very first semester here, I went into, our second semester, I went into Dr. Murphy's office covered in peanut butter, I believe it was, after a feeding session. But here's the thing, why the hitting, kicking, biting doesn't scare me. What I love about the science of behavior analysis is, just like Dr. Murphy and Dr. Eldridge were describing, seeing the principles in action with those animals, seeing a kid go from throwing their peanut butter at you and smearing their feces on the wall to using their words to gain access to their wants and needs, and knowing that that is the product of the contingencies that you've described and arranged, and what you've seen with rats and pigeons, is one of the coolest things for me, just in clinical. So yeah, you might get hit, bit, scratched occasionally, but it's super fun. I actually did initial animal work with rats, pigeons, but cockroaches. That's what scared me over to the human side, and not to the remain in the animal side. But what brought me up to Alaska was actually falling in love with the study of pseudoscience and how myth and superstition are transferred, as well as my love for technology. Folks, as you know, we live in a very rural state, and so access to things like care and clinical services and high quality and empirically validated services is tougher. So there were a lot, especially in Alaska, behavior analysis wasn't the #1 treatment, even though it's the most empirically supported for kids that are diagnosed with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities. So I saw a challenge of being able to connect clinical work with technology, to put it in the hands of people that wouldn't have an option, but to use maybe some less validated or maybe even counter-therapeutic approaches as well. And I constantly hear my old advisor, Matt Norman, once said to me when I went in complaining about a case that I was working on, he said, clinical work is hard, wear a hard hat. And that has always kind of stayed with me. If I wanted to know that red and blue made purple, I would be a chemist, I wouldn't be a psychologist. So the challenge of applying anything to a different population that doesn't have access to it otherwise is what intrigues me.
Dr. Buckingham.
Yeah, I think I mostly spoke to this earlier, which is why I hadn't chimed in yet. But what brought me to this institution, what's kept me here is really being able to do both of my loves, both clinical psychology and community psychology, and working at the intersection of both of those. There's only about 10 PhD programs in the country that do both clinical psych and community psych, and fewer of those actually do them both well. A lot of programs end up having a lot more of a clinical bent, or maybe you have to choose if you do clinical or community, even if they're co-located. And so the program that I get to work in here is really special because we do both, and we do both well, which I really appreciate. I'm also, I lived on the East Coast for quite a long time while I was in my training and whatnot, but I'm from the mountains. I'm from Colorado. And so it was very nice to move from Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and move back to, you know, where I can have hiking trails in my back door and still work at a state institution. There are very few places like that in the country. So that's really nice too. But I would say what's really special about UAA, you know, I don't get to interact with a lot of undergraduates because I don't teach much in the undergraduate program, but I would agree wholeheartedly that it's I think all of our students are so engaged with their faculty members, and I think you have access to faculty in a way that you don't necessarily have at really big institutions, but you also have resources that you don't necessarily have at really teeny tiny institutions either. You have a lot of faculty around you who are doing interesting research, who are doing really cool clinical work that you're able to engage with in a way that you might not find if you were at a smaller institution too. So it's a really nice place for that too.
Well, and
I ended up in Alaska purely by accident, which is not surprising given the way everything else unfolds. I'm married to a mountain man and he wanted to move to Alaska, so here we are. So 20 years later. And it's been a good place. And I'm like you, Sarah, I was just happy to, moving from Mississippi to Alaska, I was happy to get back into winter climates because I'm Canadian, and happy to get back to the mountains too. And UAA has been very good to me. It's a wonderful place to work.
You know, one other thing I would add, I was having this conversation with a good friend the other day who's considering taking a position up here. And I think Alaska is such the work that we do here can be so incredibly meaningful because there just aren't that many psychologists or mental health professionals or folks with bachelors in psychology here in the state. And because of that, I think that all the work that you all will do and are doing now is incredibly impactful, with great kind of prominence comes great responsibility too. And I think that's the big challenge of Alaska as well. You know, when I came here to the state, and I'm one of the only people in the state that will do affidavits for asylum applications. There just aren't other people that do that. And so it's an incredible place to have an impact because oftentimes you're the only person that can do something or is doing something. But it also comes with a challenge because we have limited colleagues up here. And so it forces us to think in really creative ways and work across professions in order to meet needs. And it also, I think, it makes whatever you do in whatever area of psychology you go into, if you choose to stay in this state, I think you will be fulfilling a tremendous need because we just don't have enough people to meet needs up here.
Well, and I think, Chloe, we did have a couple of questions in the Discord chat. It's going to be very hard to follow such a powerful statement like the one Dr. Buckingham gave us, but I think the question from the Discord chat might get us on our way. Do you want to share the question?
Sure. Is this what we discussed earlier? All right. So we did have a couple of people who obviously couldn't be here. We have a lot of club members who are working, but we did have one specific request for Dr. Azuru. One member or a couple of members really wanted to hear a certain story that you told before when you were in college and you went to a park and...
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So my history is pretty eccentric. I used to be a sailor, once, and my job was to carry oil between Japan and Saudi Arabia. And I did it until about 24. I didn't like the job, so I quit the job and I had some saving. I came to the United States. So by the time I started working, I kind of studying in the school, I was already 28. And I didn't speak that much English at the time, still now, but and so I think the story that you want to hear is, well, and I went to school in New York. It's a very small school. The first semester, I pretty much couldn't speak any English. So who I speak to, I went to park and I used to speak with squirrel. And that's what you're talking about? Is that the kind of things? Yeah, I used to talk to squirrel, and that's kind of continued for about, one semester, maybe up to about 6 months. So squirrel kept me kind of my sanity because I was kind of lonely and I don't know who to speak to. But I decided not to speak any Japanese because if I do that, I'm not going to improve my English skill. And that's how I started my college career. So given that, I came pretty far away. And so if there is any lesson to you guys is if you really try, look, when I came here, I didn't speak any English pretty much. And I didn't know in the first class there was a homework because I didn't understand anything. I just sat there. But then I came a pretty long way. And now I love talking to students, at least in semi-English. I don't know if it's a real English, but at least I try. So if you really try hard, I really believe anything is possible for you. Yeah.
What a freaking cool story. I had no idea about that. Whoever asked that question, thank you. What a neat story, Ashley.
So really, in many ways, most of us have been involved in some sort of animal work at some time or another.
Only with my dogs.
Well, thank you all for your advice and just answering all of our questions, especially for taking time out of your day to come visit us. And for our club members too, you're busy as well. Thank you for your time. And for our last kind of wrap-up question, I wanted to ask faculty, we are living in interesting times. It's hard. There's not as much maybe student-teacher interaction as we're used to. If you can give one piece of advice to students of how we can be successful, continue being successful, or start being successful during this pandemic, what would you tell students?
I would tell students that we're still here and we all have office hours and we sit here being lonesome on Zoom because nobody ever logs into our office hours. So we're still here. You can reach out. Please do. We're bored with our own company.
I guess I would chime in by saying, keep going. It is so easy to pull back and hide, but if you don't put yourself out there, you can't get the opportunity to grow. And I think it's very easy sometimes to hide behind a screen and behind a box, even when we're not forced to in the pandemic. So whatever way that you can continue to challenge yourself and not shrink away, especially on those days where it's oh so easy to shrink away, that would be my 2 cents, is just keep going.
This is maybe a little bit far afield, but I would, studying psychology doesn't make you immune to mental health issues. And you certainly don't have to have a diagnosable mental health condition in order to get whatever help and support that you need from someone who's qualified and can listen and can help you plan. So I just hope you're all prioritizing your self-care. Academics is one piece of your life. It's not all of your life. And so remember, you have to take care of your whole self in order to do well in school. And so make sure that you have good routines, make sure you're getting good sleep, make sure you're still exercising, eating well, all of those things, because they bleed into how you perform academically. And then, if you are in need of talking to someone, you have the Student Health and Counseling Center, you've got the Psychological Services Center where our master's and PhD students provide services. Right now, all the PhD students are under my supervision. And those are wonderful resources where you can get support. So I just hope you're reaching out to your connections, because it does. I feel that pull, even some from our graduate students who I work really closely with. You feel more separated, even if we feel like we're together just as much. And so I just hope you keep reaching out, because it is hard. It's hard for all of us. I don't think any of your faculty really enjoy sitting on Zoom all day either. So please, be in touch with us and make sure that you're getting resources.
And I'd love to build off that if I can, Dr. Buckingham. I attended a tiny bit of a conference earlier today, and I saw my colleague Kaz Cooper describing some advice that he was giving to other faculty who were teaching online. And he said, show yourself some grace, because it's really hard. And I think that is just as true for students as well. Like, I know that it's sometimes like hearing Yana say, just a clinician, and I hear students say, just a student, but y'all are working really hard. At no time in history have students worked harder than you guys are working. Sometimes you're going to miss things. Sometimes you're going to make mistakes. Sometimes it's going to feel overwhelming. Show yourself some grace. And like Dr. Buckingham said, have people that you can connect with professionally or otherwise, like in the club. That's a great source of support and connection for students who might not have it otherwise. So show yourself some grace. Also, behavior analysis.
I might add one more thing too. I think what Veronica has said right there is so important. Connect with each other. I think, one thing that I've noticed with my students a lot, with the students I advise, is, we miss out on so many of those micro moments now that we're on Zoom, right? When we would just be in a class for 10 minutes before the professor comes in, or, just outside in the hall studying, like those times when you connect with people that aren't planned for. And right now, most of our interactions are very planned. They're not just happening. They're not those beautiful conversations and moments to people, like Jana said earlier, which I love that, peopling, And so the more that you can create some of those moments, I think that's really important. For my graduate students, what they do is they have like writing groups. So they get together, they complain about whatever feedback I've given them, and then they write together, and provide each other support in that way. And that's a really beautiful way of just making sure that you have time. Because right now, my guess is that a lot of you are primarily connecting when you have faculty in the room too. And that's cool, but it also sets up a dynamic, I think, sometimes when you might feel a little more stifled and you can't have those genuine reactions and interactions with each other. So if you can find ways to connect more organically, I think that's a really nice way.
So I don't really have anything to add to what everyone else. I agree with everything that the faculty have told you. It's wonderful advice. And just know that we're here for you.
So what do you think, Chloe? Is it time to?
I think we are about done.
That was wonderfully done. If those of you who are still around don't mind taking a moment just to join me in thanking Chloe, President of PsyChi, for hosting such a wonderful event and putting this together for the benefit of our community. If you are watching this, of course, later and you've stuck through the whole thing, we want to make sure that you know that you are very welcome. And we're sorry you couldn't join us today. And what's that thing I'm forgetting? Behavior analysis. But no, we will record this and we will make it available later. We'll post some resources that folks have provided in the chat, also in the description of this video, so you can watch it online. Thanks so much for joining us today, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Of course.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Good weekend, everybody.